Most people reading this will work until they are 65. Not because they chose to, because they never understood the specific mechanism that makes escaping 30 years early structurally possible. And nobody showed them the numbers that prove it is not extraordinary. It is arithmetic. Here is what stopped me when I first looked at this directly. The difference between retiring at 65 and retiring at 35 is not income. Studies tracking early retirees found that the majority did not earn significantly more than their peers. The difference was a single variable applied consistently over a decade that their peers never deliberately engaged with. And here is the part that genuinely unsettled me. Most people are one or two structural decisions away from a completely different trajectory. They are not missing discipline. They are missing a specific piece of understanding. By the end of this, you will have it. I want to tell you what I thought before I understood this properly. I assumed early retirement was for people with exceptional incomes, inherited wealth, or an unusual tolerance for frugality that I did not personally possess. I had a vague plan that involved saving something, investing vaguely, and hoping the timeline worked out. Then I started looking at the actual mechanics of how people escape the standard working timeline 30 years ahead of schedule. What I found was not a secret. It was not complicated, but it was specific in a way that general financial advice almost never is. There is a structural difference between how people who retire early relate to money and how people who work until 65 relate to it. And that difference is not about sacrifice. It is about understanding where the leverage actually lives. If this kind of financial clarity is what you come here for, subscribe and turn on notifications. There is more of this coming every week. Let me give you an analogy before we get into the mechanics. Imagine two people rowing across a lake. They both have oars. They both put in effort, but one of them is rowing with the current and one of them is rowing against it. From a distance, they look like they are doing the same thing. Up close, the outcomes are completely different. The person rowing with the current is not more talented or more disciplined. They are simply positioned differently relative to a force that was always there. The mechanism that makes retiring 30 years early possible is compounding. And most people are not rowing against it deliberately. They are simply positioned sideways to it. Not aligned. Not opposed. Just not yet using it the way it can be used. The entire difference between working until 65 and stopping at 35 comes down to when you align yourself with that current and how completely. Here is the foundational number I want you to hold in your mind. A person who saves and invests 25% of their net income from age 25 in low-cost, broadly diversified investments with a historically average return assumption of 7% per year after inflation, reaches financial independence in approximately 32 years. That brings them to 57. Now watch what happens when the savings rate rises to 40%. The same person, same income, same return assumption, reaches the same destination in approximately 22 years. Age 47. At 50%, the timeline compresses to 17 years. Age 42. And at a sustained savings rate of 60 to 65%, which sounds extreme until you understand it is about structure, not deprivation, the historical timeline drops to 10 to 12 years. Age 35 to 37. This is not a theory. It is the arithmetic of compounding applied to a single controllable variable. And the variable that controls the timeline more than any other is not income. It is the gap between what you earn and what you spend. The first mechanism that separates people who escape the standard timeline from people who do not is one I had to sit with before I fully accepted its implications. Most people experience a predictable pattern when their income rises. The salary goes up, the apartment gets better, the car gets newer, the holidays get longer. By the time the raise has settled in, the spending has absorbed it entirely, and the savings rate has not moved at all. This is called lifestyle inflation, the quiet, socially normalized process by which every income increase gets converted immediately into a higher cost of living rather than a wider gap between earning and spending. It does not feel like a choice. It feels like a natural progression. Research tracking people across income levels found that the majority saw their savings rate remain essentially flat even as their income grew significantly over a decade. Because spending grew in perfect parallel, the people who retired early broke this pattern deliberately, not by refusing to enjoy life, by deciding consciously that the next income increase would be split, some to lifestyle, some to the gap. Every time income rises and the spending line stays flat, the gap widens. Every time income rises and spending rises with it, the gap stays closed and the timeline does not move. The gap is the engine. Protecting it is the work. If you are finding this useful, hit like. I appreciate it. Genuinely. The second mechanism is the one that most people intellectually understand, but structurally underuse. And it is the reason the same savings rate produces wildly different outcomes depending on where the money goes. Think of it like planting seeds. If you plant them in good soil with the right conditions, they grow. If you plant them in a container with no drainage and poor light, they survive, but they do not compound the way the same seeds would elsewhere. The container is a savings account earning 2%. The good soil is a tax-advantaged, low-cost, broadly diversified investment account compounding at a historically average rate. The difference is not dramatic in year 1. By year 15, it is transformative. Research following people who reached financial independence early found that almost all of them had maximized tax-advantaged accounts before directing additional savings elsewhere. The mathematics of tax-sheltered compounding over 15 years produces a meaningfully larger portfolio than the identical contributions in a taxable account for no additional effort or risk. Fund fees that seem trivial, 1%, 1.5% annually, consume a portion of every year's growth permanently. Over 20 years at a 1% fee difference, the impact is the equivalent of losing several years of contributions entirely. Where your savings goes matters as much as how much you save. Now let me show you what the full picture looks like in concrete numbers. Take two people, both 28 years old, both earning $70,000 per year net. Person 1 saves 15%. In a standard savings account earning 2%, spending rises with every raise. By 58, they have approximately $350,000. Still working, person 2 saves 40% from the start, directs every raise into the gap rather than lifestyle, invests in low-cost index funds inside tax-advantaged accounts. By age 38, 10 years in, person 2 has accumulated approximately $280,000. By 43, 15 years in, approximately $500,000 and approaching a realistic financial independence threshold for their spending level. The same income, the same starting point. The difference is entirely structural. Not talent, not luck, not an inheritance that arrived conveniently. Two decisions, applied consistently, protect the gap and put the gap in the right container. Here are the 3 things I want you to carry from this. First, your savings rate is the master lever of your timeline. Not your income, not the market. The percentage of net income you save and invest each month determines more than any other single variable when financial independence becomes structurally reachable. Second, lifestyle inflation is the mechanism that keeps most people on the standard timeline without them ever consciously choosing it. Every time income rises, a deliberate decision about where that increase goes is the difference between a timeline that moves and one that does not. Third, the structure of where your money goes matters almost as much as how much you save. Tax-advantaged accounts and low-cost investments are not advanced strategies. They are the baseline that early retirement mathematics depends on. The tension this video started with was simple and real. Most people will work until 65, and there is a specific reason why. It is not that they lack drive or intelligence or income. It is that the mechanism that makes escaping 30 years early possible, the compounding of a protected gap between income and spending, directed into the right structure, sustained over a decade, was never shown to them clearly. Now you have seen it. The gap between the person who retires at 35 and the person who retires at 65 is not 30 years of extraordinary sacrifice. It is 1 or 2 structural decisions made early enough, held consistently enough, for compounding to do what it does when you finally align with it rather than around it. The path is not easy, but it is not mysterious either, and now you know exactly what it requires. Retiring 30 years early is not about earning more than everyone else. It is about letting the gap between what you earn and what you spend compound long enough to make work genuinely optional.